Welcome to the first part of the Advanced Excel class. In this first part, we're going to be teaching you how to manipulate raw data. So as we can see down here on our raw text tab, the data that we've been given here is not spaced into different columns like we would ideally want it to be. This can sometimes happen when you're pulling data from a server or opening a text file. The data that you have will be spaced out by commas instead of spaced into different columns. So to fix this, we're going to select the entire column of data by selecting column A. Then we're going to go up here and go Data, Text to Columns. And when we do that, wizard comes up, the text to columns wizard, and it allows us two options. We can either select fixed width or we can select delimited. Delimited is what you're going to use most often. Fixed width only allows you to create new columns based on a certain number of characters. So every 5 characters, create a new column. Delimited, on the other hand, allows you to create new columns based on wherever a comma appears or wherever a space appears. So we're going to select delimited, then we're going to choose next, and you can see that we've selected comma here. Without comma selected, the data preview down here does nothing new, so everything is in one column again. But when we select comma, Excel looks for the commas in the raw data and creates a new column based on wherever the comma was. So now when we have comma selected down in the data preview, we see that everything is spaced out into new columns based on where the commas were. So we do that, then we click finish, and we can see that our data is now in different columns like we want it to be. The next thing that we want to do to clean up this raw data is we can see that living costs right here doesn't have a space in between living and costs. That's personal preference to do that, but we want to do that because every other 2-word combination like Murray Station, cable and internet, gas and electric, they all have a space in between the words. So we want to keep that the same and do that with living costs. So to start doing that, we're going to go down to this Raw Data 1 tab and move over in the tabs. And we're going to start by counting how many characters are in each expense category name to try to see if we can count how many are in living costs and if that's unique from others. So to do that, we're going to create a column, and in cell G1, we're going to create a column title and label it length. Then underneath that, we're going to use the length formula, which is equals len, and open up the parentheses. And now it's going to ask us which cell we want to count how many characters are in. So we're going to select A2, and what that's going to do is count how many characters are in cell A2. So the answer that it should give us is 4, because food is 4 characters in length. And we hit enter, and we see that it is 4. So we double click the fill handle, and that goes down to the bottom of our data set. And then we look and we can see that living costs has a length of 11, and class supplies down here has a length of 13. So now what we want to do is create 2 columns based on those lengths. One column is going to be titled length-11 in cell H1, and the other is going to be length-13 in cell I1. Now we're going to create 2 different columns based on the length, or we're going to create 2 different formulas based on the length to try to add a space in between living and costs, and to try to add a space in between class and supplies. To do this, we're going to be using a nested function, which basically means putting a function within a function. So for instance, putting a different formula within the if formula. If the length is equal to 11, then do this formula. So we're going to be using that exact function, the if function, to say that if the length is equal to 11, then what we want to do is we want to take the word living and add a space, and then add the word costs, and put that all together. And a fancy word for putting that all together, or gluing it all together, is the concatenate function. So we're going to be making use of the concatenate function, the if function, and then 2 more, right and left. And what right and left do is, for the left formula, it starts on the leftmost side of the cell and asks you how many characters to count over, and then it'll give you that many. So for instance, for living, if we did left of this cell count 6, it would give us the exact word living. And then we can add a space, and then we can use the right function to count from the right side towards the left to count 5 letters to encompass the word cost. So then that will give us living space costs, and that'll be all glued together with the concatenate formula, and our result will be living costs with a space in between the two words. So now we're going to put that into Excel language so Excel knows what to do. So we're going to use all these formulas, and we're going to type equals if and open up the parentheses. Then we're going to select G2 to make reference to the length, and we're going to say if the length is equal to 11, because we're in the length 11 column, then we're going to type a comma, and it's going to ask us what do you want us to do if the length is equal to 11. And what we want is, just like I said before, we want to use the concatenate formula. So we want to glue things together. So what are the 3 things that we want to glue? So we want to take, if the length is equal to 11, we want to take living. So we need to use the left formula. So left, and we're going to get living from the expense category, so select cell A2. And from the left side, counting to the right, living is 6 characters long, so it's going to ask us how many characters to take from the left side. So we're going to do 6, hit a comma, and it's going to ask us what else do we want to add together. And we want to add a space, so we're going to type an open quotation mark, add a space, and a close quotation mark. And that tells Excel to take everything in between the quotation marks, so it takes a space. Then we're going to type a comma, and it's going to ask us for the next thing that we want to add to that. Now we want to count from the right side and open up parentheses, and again make reference to the expense category. We want to type a comma, and it's going to say how many characters from the right side towards the left do you want us to count. And we want to count 5 characters this time. So we type 5, close the parentheses, then we close the parentheses again to close off the concatenate formula. Then we type a comma, and it's going to ask if the length is not equal to 11, what do you want the value returned to be? And we don't want anything returned, so we're going to show that by typing 2 quotation marks with nothing in it at all. If we were to leave this blank, we would get a dash instead of just an empty cell. So we want an empty cell, so we're going to put 2 quotation marks, then we're going to close off the if formula and hit enter. Then when we double click the fill handle, we can see that living costs now has a space in between it every time the length is equal to 11. So we want to do the exact same thing, but we want to do it now with when the length is equal to 13, and our left and right formulas are going to be a little different because class is only 5 characters in length, so we want to count 5 characters from the left, and supplies is now 8 characters in length, so we want to count 8 characters from the right side. So we're going to go through this one a little bit more quickly. We're going to do equals if the length is equal to 13, then we want to glue things together, so concatenate, and make sure that you spell that correctly, otherwise it won't work properly. Then we want to glue together the left side of the expense category, counting over 5 characters. We want to add a space, quotation mark, space, quotation mark, comma, and then we want to count from the right side 8 characters to get supplies. Then we want to close off the concatenate formula, type a comma, and put 2 quotation marks so that if the length is not equal to 13, we want nothing in the cell at all. And we close off the if formula, and we double click the fill handle, and we see that now class supplies has a space in between it. So now we want to combine those 2 columns, length 11 and length 13. So to do that, we're going to use a new column and title it combined. And this time we're going to take the 2 columns and smush them together. So to do that, that's the same as using the concatenate formula. We can add things together that way. But a simpler way, a way to use if you're not using this within a complicated function. So I would recommend using concatenate in complicated functions. Otherwise, things can sometimes get thrown off if you're not careful. So it's just using the and sign if you're just doing it simply. So to do this, we're going to do equals h2 and sign I2. And that's going to combine the contents of h2 and I2 and put them together. So we hit enter, and then we double click the fill handle, and now we see that living costs and class supplies are in the same column. So now what we want to do is we want to combine this column with the column in column A, the initial expense category column. But the thing that we can't do here is just use the and sign, because if we do that, we're going to take living costs without a space and add it with living costs with a space to have living costs twice. So we need a little more complicated of a function here. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a column called combined 2, and we're going to use an if formula, just a simple one to say that if the combined column is blank, then take the expense category column. But if the combined column is not blank, then take the combined column contents. So that in Excel language is equals if J2 is equal to, once again, blank is 2 quotation marks with nothing in between. So we type 2 quotation marks with nothing in between. Then we're going to hit a comma. Then we want A2. And then it's going to say, if J2 is not blank, then what? Well, then we want J2, because that means that either living costs with a space or class supplies with the spaces in there. So we do that, close off the parentheses, double click the fill handle, and we see we now have an expense category column with spaces for living costs and class supplies. So now what we want to do is we want to take this new column and put it back into column A to replace the data that was in there. So what we do is select cell K2, then type Control Shift down arrow, and that selects all our data down to the bottom of the data set. We're going to type Control Copy to copy that, and then we're going to go up here, and in cell A2 we can't just Control V, because the data in column K is a formula, it's not just words. So we need to paste just the words. If we just did Control V to paste, we would be pasting the formulas. So we're going to right click and select Paste Special, and then we're going to select Values. So that'll just paste the words. Then we hit OK, and that we can see that there's no errors that appear. But we do see that column H and I now have nothing in them. And the reason for that is because the length of living costs and class supplies is now 1 longer because we added a space. So we can see that in the length column, no expense category has a length of 11 or 13. So all these cells are blank because the length is not 11 or 13. But we no longer need these cells, so we're just going to highlight column G through K, and we're going to delete it. And watch when I press the backspace button, just the cell in the upper leftmost corner of our selection gets deleted. So when we want to delete a lot of data like this, we need to make sure to hit the delete button, not just backspace like we would in Microsoft Word. So now we have a cleaned up data set that we can make use of and go forward with it. So now we're going to have Emily talk to you about how to do pivot tables.